piece of information. That's all it is at first. Mary of Magdala came to the tomb and found it open. That's all she knew. Piece of information doesn't carry a whole lot of weight until it's put into context. So she saw this empty tomb and made a supposition. Someone must have moved the stone and stolen the Lord's body. That seems to be pretty close to how I might have seen it. 2 + 2 = 4. The stone was moved away. Jesus was dead. He was placed in there when the stone was put in front. The stone is now out of the way. And what else can it be? He certainly didn't get up and walk out on his own, because that doesn't make sense. That's 2 + 2 = oranges. So she went and told the disciples. Piece of information. The stone has been moved away, and his body's gone. So they make the next step. He must have been stolen. Between the time when Peter and John ran to the tomb and looked in and found the empty tomb, something changed. When Simon Peter arrived after him, he went into the tomb and saw the burial cloths there, the cloth that had covered his head, not with the burial cloths, but rolled up in a separate place. So far, the same story. Then the other disciple also went in, the one who had arrived at the tomb first, and he saw and believed. Something was different. He remembered, I presume Peter did as well, and they began to process through these words that Jesus had said, "I will rise on the third day." It's the third day. Wait a minute. He rose from the dead? They did not yet understand the scripture that he had to rise from the dead. They didn't quite process through. It was a beginning. They saw him die, and they were now seeing the empty tomb, which was pointing in a direction that they didn't quite understand. He was dead, and now he's... And then they began to tell the stories to other people. They began to spread this good news. We have in the first reading from the book of Acts, which is a little later in the book. Jesus has already risen, has already appeared to the disciples, and has gone back to heaven. So at this point, we have Peter talking to others about the whole story. He talks about the beginnings of the public ministry. John's baptism begins with that, and then it continues into the miracles that were public information. People saw these things happen. Multiplied loaves and fish in front of thousands. He healed people of leprosy, blindness, being unable to walk, and now they could see, they could hear, they were clean. This was public record on some level. Hundreds of people saw these occurrences. He went about doing good and healing all those oppressed by the devil. It was not just physical healings, it was spiritual stuff going on too. The man who was possessed by legion, these devils, these spirits were inhabiting him and causing all kinds of horrible things, and now he was clean. His family knew him. It wasn't some random stranger. Think about the guy with the snake oil that comes into town. Hey, this stuff will cure you. And he's got some plant in the audience. Wow, I can walk now, or I'm cured. These people were known. Remember that scripture just a couple weeks ago? The blind man cured. They bring his parents in. Is this your son? Yep. How can he see? I don't know. He was blind before, but he obviously can see. We are witnesses of all that he did, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on the tree. That was public record. Public execution, like the Wild West hangings. People saw it happen. He was dead. Public record. This man, God raised on the third day. Now we take a twist. Because being raised from the dead is something quite different than these other things. It happened that only a few saw this, not as many. Because then it needs to take another twist. It needs to be just pieces of information which are somewhat ambivalent. It's 70 degrees, or that's wood, or you're wearing a pink shirt. Pieces of information. But then it takes that next step of, it wasn't something verifiable out here, it was something that I believe. Because it wasn't just they saw someone that looked like Jesus, they saw him himself, but it doesn't make sense. He was dead, but he showed them his wrists. And they had to make that next leap. It wasn't a dream. It was really Jesus himself, alive. And then they told someone else. It was no longer just a piece of information, it was something that had changed their heart. And so, they told someone. He commissioned us to preach to the people and testify that he is the one appointed by God as judge of the living and of the dead. Think about the person standing in the witness box and putting their hand on the Bible and saying, I swear to tell the truth, and such, and they witnessed to what they saw. I saw this happen. And then the jury either believes or disbelieves the witness. And then a verdict is reached, guilty or not guilty. In this case, someone spreads the good news. I had something happen to me, and I want to share it with you because it's changed my life. And then that next person, by the witness of that first, allows something to happen, and then they share the good news. They pass it on to someone else, who then allows that to happen. They open the door to the possibility that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead of his own power. And that meant something more than just a feel-good. Isn't it nice that there's something beyond death? That makes me kind of a little more settled, because I don't know what comes after my last breath expires. My brainwaves cease. But someone told me that there's something next, and that makes me happy. That's pretty shallow. That's good news. That's only a little part of it. Because it's not just a feel-good. It's not just Norman Vincent Peale. We're given the ability to live here and now something different, because it's not just good news about some fantasy that there might be something next, but that we know that now and here there is something different. St. Paul, writing to the Colossians, says, do you not know that a little yeast leavens all the dough? I have a recipe for 5-minute artisan bread. Ever seen that before? 5-minute artisan bread. You take the flour, 6 cups of flour, and a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. A 1/4 teaspoon. You mix it in with the flour, add some water, and let it sit on the counter for a day. And before you know it, that yeast starts working. A 1/4 teaspoon. Not a full package, but a 1/4 teaspoon. A little yeast leavens the whole thing, because that yeast starts working on those weak parts, and then it spreads. And before you know it, all 6 cups of flour have been affected. All we need in this room of, where are we at, Dave? 275? somewhere in there. Around 300 people in this room, all we need is one. One person who has had the good news not just preached to them, but has allowed it to take an effect in their heart. And before you know it, it starts spreading. And we all start living differently, not just because of good news that is just a nice thing, but good news which has an effect in our lives, because grace can change us. And before you know it, the 300 here have turned into 20,000 in Martinsburg. And the 20,000 in Martinsburg turn into the 1.5 million in West Virginia. And those 1.5 million in West Virginia become the 350 million in the United States. Before you know it, 7 billion people in the world have been transformed. And it began with one. Who is that? Is it you? Well, I'm not sure about me, because I'm not very good at public speaking. Peter was a fisherman. He wasn't a public speaker. He wasn't trained in oratory. Blue collar, not educated, rather impulsive, kind of scattered. But he was the first one to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And from him, the whole world has heard the good news. However, having heard the good news does not mean that it's taken effect yet. It's an ongoing process for every one of us. Whether or not we believe will be borne out. How does our life look? Does it reflect the reality of a risen Christ? We have that opportunity today and the rest of our lives. May it have an effect in our heart. May others see that happen and be transformed because it's spread like yeast. Good news affecting the world, transforming hearts.